Welcome back, everyone, to Module 1. We're calling this Boomers, Xers, and Intro to the Millennials. Let's review some things we learned in the intro. Well, we know that millennials are definitely different than other generations, but also that every generation is different, and generation gaps are a natural part of life and at work. We know that, and we learn that generations are a natural source of conflict in the workplace. Fully 3 out of 4 workers think that generational differences cause challenges in the workplace. And finally, we reviewed the objectives of this training, which is to help you understand millennials and maximize their performance. So we all know that generations are different, but why are they different, and how do they possibly get to be so different? Well, in this slide, we demonstrate how that actually happens. And it really is the confluence between 2 variables, a person's age and the influence that external factors like the culture at the time, society, politics, economics, all the things that are going on in the outside world of that individual shape and affect who that person is. In fact, research has suggested that people are influenced 8 times more before the age of 25 than after the age of 25. And by the time someone is 40, well, their brain has been fully developed. So how you see the world is very much dependent on your upbringing, how the influences of the external world had an impact on you, and generations is really just another form of diversity, like many other forms of diversity that you've learned, right? So every generation sees the world through their own lenses. So the baby boomers, when they put their lenses on, they see the world through their own experiences, whether it's the products and services they've used, the politicians in their lives, the kind of music they listen to, and so forth. This is what shaped the baby boomers to who they are. Now with Gen Xers, same thing. They had different experiences in their lives when they were younger, and all of these things very much shaped who they were as a person. Now with millennials, they're still being shaped, right? So this is one of the reasons we're spending so much time on millennials, because they're still being shaped, and we're still figuring out what it is about millennials that's different about the existing generations. Now, we're going to do a little simple lesson on what a generation is. If we're going to be talking about generations, we should mention that the definition of a generation, and we're calling it a social generation, is a birth year group whose length is about 18 to 22 years, roughly the span of a phase of life. So every generation has a couple characteristics. They each share a common, what we call age location in history. In other words, they are a certain age during a certain period of time in history. So if you were between 15 and 25 during the Summer of Love of 1967, Woodstock in 1969, the race riots of 1968, you were in fact a baby boomer. And you had very specific kinds of ways of looking at things based on that shaping period, which is very different than your parents, right? So your parents were around during those same those same periods of time, but different age brackets, so different viewpoints. So every generation shares common attitudes, behavior traits, and a collective identity as a result of having the same age, location, and history. Now, this is a cartoon that I love to show because it really demonstrates the difference between age brackets and generations. Every one of these young teenagers in the 50s, 70s, 90s, and 2010 are all the same age, but they all have very different attitudes towards life depending on their shaping period. Now, one thing that is very important to realize about generations, which really gets at the heart of this notion of bias and implicit bias, is that every generation that exists views incoming generations negatively. They never live up to expectations. So study after study demonstrates, for example, that boomers, by a 2-to-1 margin, do not think favorably of millennials. And by the way, that's the same with Gen X as well. But what you have to realize is that there was some pretty awful things that were said about boomers when they were the millennials' age and when Xers when they were young. Boomers were called spoiled, disrespectful, entitled, not polite, intellectually arrogant, and socially immature, while Xers were called slackers, wasted, dangerous, shocking on the outside, and knowable on the inside. It sounded like a terrifying generation, quite frankly. Popular culture was very specific about criticizing boomers when they were young. In fact, Life magazine editor said, "Even as I said it, I knew the phrase 'to make a living' could have absolutely no meaning to these children of the affluent society." This was in 1968. And guys, the original Me generation were the boomers. This is a magazine cover from New York Magazine in 1974. Yes, the Me generation. So the millennials were not the first Me generation. The baby boomers were the first Me generation. Now the Xers, for their part, this is a cover of a Time magazine that came out in 1990. Laid back, late blooming, or just lost. Overshadowed by the baby boomers, America's next generation is a hard act to follow. So they're already saying how great the baby boomers are, and they're just lamenting these new young upstarts coming onto the scene in 1990, also known as Generation X. So we know there's inherent biases in generations, particularly to younger generations. But one of the things that we found is very useful in this training is to teach everybody about your own generation, baby boomers and Gen Xers. So we're going to talk a little bit of time on baby boomers, and then we're going to talk a little bit about Xers.